Nissan is one of the big three Japanese automakers, alongside Toyota and Honda. Nissan has been ranked above Honda in the past, though it is currently the smallest of the big three, and that is going to lead me right into the main issue here. See, viewers of this channel have been requesting that I make a video about the rise and fall of Nissan. It was actually one of the top comments on a recent video, and I have to agree, it is a compelling subject with a lot of elements to it. Now, I want to say this right away, I do not want to make it seem like Nissan has been totally failing or rapidly approaching bankruptcy or anything like that. In fact, they were believed to be much closer to bankruptcy in the 1990s. More about that later. But I will be upfront here and say that Nissan has not been doing well. For years now, they have been selling fewer cars, struggling with their reputation, and losing a lot of value. In 2018, their market cap was around $40 billion, and today it is down to almost a fourth of that. On February 9th, 2024, shares of the company fell 12%. It was the biggest single-day drop since, well, they were having those previous struggles. This one really stands out to me. During a disappointing earnings call in 2019, their CEO at the time proclaimed that the company had hit rock bottom. You do not want to hear the leader of a company use the phrase rock bottom, so clearly there is reason to be concerned about Nissan. In this video, my goal is to provide a greater understanding of this company by talking about their history while highlighting the ups and downs that have led them to this unfortunate situation that they find themselves in today. The roots of Nissan technically go back to the 1910s, when the Japanese auto market was still in its very early stages. Throughout the next couple of decades, there were multiple mergers between smaller automakers that ultimately resulted in a newly named company called Nissan, being placed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange in 1934. The company had previously been called Nihon Sangyo, and this was a simpler combination of those two words. 3 years later, they released the Datsun Type 15, which according to the company was Japan's first mass-produced vehicle. Yeah, that right there is a potentially confusing part. Even though the company is called Nissan, they have branded many of their vehicles under the name Datsun. I think it's interesting that the DAT in the word Datsun stems from the first letters of the last names of the three initial investors that made it possible to start one of the main companies that evolved into Nissan. In fact, Datsun was the name they used when they started selling vehicles in the United States in 1958, where they soon became one of the top importers of vehicles into the country, known for their cars and their pickup trucks. They were able to break into the US market in part by offering fuel-efficient vehicles that were especially attractive during the fuel crisis, and by introducing vehicles that were specifically designed for that market. It wasn't until the 1980s when they started rebranding everything they sold in the US from Datsun to Nissan, but it was still a while ago, so that's why I'm guessing most of the people out there at this point are not incredibly familiar with the name Datsun. It was also in that decade when they started producing vehicles in the United States, opening their first US factory in Tennessee, and they started a second, more luxury brand called Infiniti. As I'm sure you could tell, that was just a broad overview of the first few decades of this company. It wasn't completely smooth sailing, but Nissan had steadily grown without anything that I would consider to be a major setback. Nothing like what was about to happen anyway. Truthfully, the 1990s was probably among the worst decades that you could imagine for a car maker like this. In 1992, Nissan reported their first pre-tax loss since the 1950s and continued losing money almost every year. By 1999, their total debt had grown to over $35 billion, and they were struggling to keep up with their payments. Analysts were predicting a bankruptcy filing, and it was starting to look like Nissan might be shutting down. Part of the reason behind the trouble was economic factors. The global economy was having issues, and the currency exchange rates between the Japanese yen and the US dollar were not in their favor. In addition to that, things had become so much more competitive to where Nissan was consistently losing market share. More and more customers were gravitating toward the Honda Accord or the Toyota Camry rather than the comparable Nissan Altima. Toyota's luxury brand Lexus was also becoming favored over Nissan's competing brand Infiniti. And then, to amplify things even further, Nissan was slow to add any SUVs to their lineup. Maybe some of the audience remembers that SUVs started becoming really popular in the 1990s. They were like the next big thing, with vehicles like the Ford Explorer or the Jeep Grand Cherokee first being launched early in that decade. Overall, there are so many ways I can describe it, but Nissan was struggling and probably would not have made it through without any major changes. In 1999, Nissan joined forces with a smaller French automaker called Renault. It was a deal where Renault paid $5.4 billion to buy 37% of Nissan. Renault wanted to do this as an opportunity to expand globally, specifically into North America, and Nissan wanted to do it because, well, they desperately needed money. However, I would have to say that the most impactful part of this deal ended up being the addition of Carlos Ghosn. He was a vice president at Renault that took over as chief operating officer of Nissan following the deal and later became the leader of the whole company. He was the main person behind Nissan's big revival plan. He even announced that he would resign if Nissan did not become profitable by March of 2001. And amazingly, they did become profitable and were able to reduce their debt to a much more manageable level. It was a pretty comprehensive plan that mostly focused on cost cutting and product development. He was already known as Le Cost Killer in France, by the way. Among other things, Nissan shut down 5 of their plants in Japan, laid off 14% of their workforce, sold off divisions that weren't involved with automobiles, all while taking advantage of efficiencies from the two companies now working together. Things like combining their sales operations or marketing efforts, or taking advantage of discounts by buying higher quantities of materials or parts that they needed to build the cars. I should mention that they also started working with Mitsubishi, an alliance that was strengthened when Nissan bought 34% of the company in 2016, so all 3 of them have been closely tied together. Through all these cost-cutting measures, profit margins improved from each vehicle that they were selling, and they started selling more vehicles. They invested a lot of money to change their lineup and get it to the market faster, one of the more notable changes being the addition of SUVs, like the Murano, first introduced in 2002, and the Rogue, introduced the following year, which you may be surprised to learn is now their best-selling vehicle in the United States, selling more units than the Altima and the Sentra combined. The whole thing is considered to be one of the biggest turnarounds that the industry had ever seen, and Carlos Ghosn was highly praised as being the one responsible for it. He received multiple awards for it. He was even the subject of a Japanese comic, while being recognized as the first person to simultaneously serve as CEO at 2 of the world's largest 500 companies. From that point, though, everything started to get messy. In 2017, Ghosn stepped down from his position as CEO of Nissan, and the following year was arrested for essentially stealing money from the company. The specifics of it get a little complicated, but there was a whistleblower that came forward with accusations against him. Nissan spent a few months investigating the claims by looking deeper into their financial statements and ultimately came to the conclusion that Ghosn and a director over there named Greg Kelly had concealed over $300 million in payments that had gone to themselves and other executives. Nissan alleges that they were getting compensated by the company without disclosing it and using corporate funds for personal use, things like buying expensive properties in different countries or using the company's airplane to go on vacations. Believe it or not, it gets even crazier. The following year, while out on bail, he escaped from a hotel by hiding in a box and flew over to Lebanon on a private jet. As far as I've seen, he has always maintained complete innocence, and later on filed a lawsuit against Nissan for $1 billion. And as if that wasn't enough, the person they hired as the new CEO after him also stepped down. It was in 2019 as part of a scandal where he was improperly paid by $900,000. I am sure I don't need to point out that none of this has been good for Nissan. It has hurt them financially, it has hurt the public's perception of them, it has been distracting for them, and it has left them without a stable, consistent leader. Obviously, I'm not going to say that the scandals and the lack of leadership have been the only factors behind the recent struggles, but they have been a big part of it. Typically, around half of their vehicles each year are sold in either the United States or China, their 2 biggest markets, and as you can see, both of those markets have been declining. In China, they have been having trouble keeping up with the local competitors, like BYD, who are attracting a lot of the younger customers by offering more electric vehicles with more advanced technology built into them. In the United States, it has been a similar issue that, again, seems to go back to their lineup. I think it's potentially telling that their global head of design said that he was disgusted by who they were as a company and described it as a little depressed. They have since been trying to address the issue by redesigning some of the more popular models and introducing new ones, notably the Nissan Z, based on the Z series that was made popular in the 1970s. There have been mixed results with all of these, but in 2023, there was an increase in US vehicle sales, potentially from selling many of them at at a discount, but it can be seen as a step in the right direction. Their plan moving forward is to continue updating their lineup by launching 7 new models in North America and refreshing most of the existing ones by 2026. Also, I think it's important to point out that unlike the 1990s, Nissan has remained mostly profitable, with the only exceptions being a couple years during the pandemic. And following all of that craziness, they've had a more consistent leadership team that, in my opinion anyway, seems to be at least working toward a solution to all of these problems. So again, even though Nissan hasn't been doing quite as well as they would hope, I don't think that we're going to stop seeing Nissan vehicles on the road anytime soon. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Nissan, and how has your opinion changed over the years? As a consumer, have you ever owned one of these vehicles, and if so, which one was it, and how was your experience? Would you recommend it to someone else, or do you think they'd be better off with one of the other automakers? And finally, the big question here, what do you see for the future of Nissan? Do you think that they're moving in the right direction, doing what they need to do to overcome these setbacks, or are they in serious trouble here? If you're concerned about their current direction, what do they need to change in order to recover? And any other thoughts you have about Nissan or anything else I talked about in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.